Hey everyone, it is February 13, 2014. I'm Rene Ritchie, and right now we're going to talk about Flappy Bird down. We're going to talk about fake iPhone 6 pictures, Apple TV rumors, and the merging of the cable empires. This is the iMore Show. Joining me as always, we have the managing editor of iMore.com, Mr. Peter Cohen. How are you, Peter?
Good, Rene. How you doing? Are you happy to be back home?
Yeah, I was in Winnipeg, Manitoba for several days, which is even colder and more miserable than Montreal.
Yeah, Winnipeg, Manitoba just does not seem like a very nice place this time of year.
I think it's where we store people for refrigerated, longevity in Canada. I'm not sure.
Ah, okay. So, anybody who's going into cryogenic suspension after they die?
I think that's why Kevin Mitchell looks so young still. He's like 87, but he looks like he's still in his 20s.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So there was some fun going on while I was gone. I wanted to talk to you first about the turns out to be fake iPhone 6 pictures, and I wanted to get your take on this. We go back and forth on this a lot, and we did a whole show, I think, with Jim Dalrymple about this, about what media's responsibility is when something like this happens. And like I said, we've gone back and forth. Sometimes we publish stuff like this, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we feel like it's better to ignore a rumor. Sometimes we feel like it's our duty to say that it's not true or is dubious or sketchy. And I don't know if there's any correct answer. I think there might just be correct motivations.
Correct motivations. Yeah, I mean, it's always a crapshoot if you're in the news game when these things happen, because there's the strong impetus to kind of share the information with everybody because your readers are going to be excited, but it's also in cases like this impossible to verify. And this was debunked not too long after it came to light, but it sort of took the crowdsourcing Zapruder-like deconstruction of the images to really figure that out. So it's tough if it's just one person's call.
All right, let me back up for a minute. And just so some pictures were posted of what was said might be, so actually let me back up a little bit further. Sonny Dixon, who last year had a very, very good track record finding pictures of Apple components on Chinese websites and in China, the iPhone 5S, the different cases for that, some of the iPad stuff, it turned out to be legitimate. He posted these images saying that they were a tease of, I figure, a blog post he was working on. He later put the blog post up, and in the blog post said he was not 100% sure about them, but again, he had a very good track record. And then another Twitter user who used a pseudonym and who had absolutely no track record posted very similar images, including a front plate. The images were of a larger iPhone and had similar design language to the current generation iPad mini and iPad Air. So we published them. We did point out that Sonny had a good track record, that we didn't know anything about the new guy, that the design language looked interesting to us. In fact, I tweeted out that I would like a new iPhone to look along these lines. And that was the first post we put up. And actually, we got made fun of on Twitter because we put it up, quote-unquote, late, according to some people.
Yeah, go figure.
Damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Really, I mean, you really are. You can be first on the draw, and somebody's going to complain that you weren't first because they saw it on another site first before they saw it on iMore. So, can't make everyone happy.
So then, what it turned out, I saw Counter Notions on Twitter first point out that when you do renders, so some of the ways people put fake pictures up is they make 3D models of them. Those you can usually tell. So the more recent trick is to make a 3D model of something and then photograph the screen so that it looks like an actual photo. It has the textures and artifacts and things you would see in a photograph. And one of the ways to make something look real is to make it look dirtied up. If it looks perfect, like a 3D model you see in a 3DFX benchmarking test. It is obviously fake. But what happened is this person used the same sort of dirty texture on two different parts, two different images. And because it matched so closely, first Contra and then later I saw this on Reddit as well, could tell that it was a rendering because it had those repetitions in it.
Right, exactly. And you know, it's very talented 3D artists trying to sort of fill in the uncanny valley that we're always hearing about. You know, it's just trying to get it more and more realistic. But you know, fortunately, there are eagle-eyed people out there who can look at these things and say, "Wait, that texture got reused. This is bogus."
So I guess, I mean, if you believe it's your duty to only publish things that are 100% verified, I do think it'll be a very lonely place to live in, and that it's not always doing a service, because part of the reason people come to sites like iMore and other sites is not just to have headlines, but to have takes, to have opinions. And one of the services we can provide is, yes, curating the news, deciding what to put up and what not to put up, but also contextualizing the news, saying that, you know, this is real, this is definitely fake, and in the case of this is really fake, or if we don't know yet, we can say we don't know yet and give you our opinion based on it. And I do think that does add some value, because you're going to see these things come up a million times, and you may not know how to determine the veracity of these kinds of things. Based on our tip box alone, how many times these get tweeted to us and emailed to us, it's obvious that people do think they're real or do have questions about them. So I think there is a level of service that can be provided.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, you know, you strive for accuracy, but the fact of the matter is that rumors are sort of the stock and trade of the Mac blogosphere these days. And you know, I rant against it. You know, every once in a while, it really irritates me. It was irritating me earlier this week, you know, with something that had nothing to do with the iPhone 6 quote-unquote renders. But you know, it's something that we just have to live with, I guess, because Apple's a very secretive company and we don't know what's coming down the pike. So nature abhors a vacuum, and people are going to fill in blanks where they can find them.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things, because I've covered, as you have, I've covered outside of Apple as well, and it's very different. For example, you'll get a leaked PowerPoint where the company puts all these images up on it, you know, and sends it to a carrier or sends it to a partner, and somebody there leaks it, and it's an official document from the company. So there's, you know, maybe you have to check into it a little bit, but I mean, it's obvious when something's real or not real, and other people just leak stuff all the time, and they start to bait their reputation on it. I think a lot of it has to do with how you cover it. For example, if you put up a headline saying this is the new iPhone, and then, you know, half a day later put up a thing saying this was a scam, this was not the new iPhone, I think then you're servicing your needs. You're not servicing the needs of the reader. I think if you put up, you know, these are purported pictures or sketchy pictures of the new iPhone, and then dig into it, I think then it's not quite as exciting, maybe, but I think it's a better overall way of doing it.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
All right, so what do you think about this in general, Peter? Because I've been thinking about this for a while. The iPhone is now sort of the stepchild when it comes to design language at Apple. The iPad Air, the iPad Mini, even the iPod Touch all look very similar. They have the screen, then they have those rounded backs, and you know, in the iPod Touch case, iPod Touch's case, that nice colored aluminum rounded back. The iPhone is still squared off. It's still a round rec that looks extruded out. If Apple does, well, Apple obviously they're going to do another iPhone this year, but would you like to see them sort of unify that language a bit?
Well, I've always felt that, you know, Apple doesn't do things like a unified design language just for its own sake. You know, Apple follows, you know, a very sort of Bauhaus principle of, you know, form following function, and I think that if the function of the devices demands a similar design language, then it makes a lot of sense. But I don't want to see Apple do anything just for, you know, the sake of unification or any sort of artificial yardstick that they have to follow.
What about the other one of the other things that a lot of other manufacturers have been doing is going closer and closer towards edge-to-edge glass. If you look at some of their phones, there's barely any front plate anymore. Obviously, the home button limits what Apple can do, and now that Touch ID is there, it limits the size and shape of the home button because you still have to be able to take a fingerprint read off it. But given your druthers and given the possibilities, would you like to see more glass up front?
I would, and I'd like to see that glass used, of course, edge to edge as well. Apple has in the past been pretty efficient about how it uses that front space, and I'd like to see it continue. One thing that concerns me about that is what I was just saying. I don't want to see Apple do anything just for the sake of doing it. I want there to be a reason behind it. So I'd be very curious to see how the experience of using the iPhone would change if that was the case.
I do have fond memories of the original iPhone, the iPhone 3G, 3GS, even the iPhone 5C. It doesn't have those hard edges, and there's something nice about holding that as an object too.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a fondness for it too, in particular the curved back. There's something about the new iPhones that I just don't find as comfortable when I hold them in my hands. Quite frankly, I drop them more often. They slip out of my hand more often, and I think that flat black backplane has something to do with it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. If they do go to a larger screen size, maximizing the amount of front that's used as a screen would help keep the size of the device small. And I think a lot of people worry when they hear about a bigger iPhone that the entire package will be bigger. And I've seen the, what is it? Not the HTC One, the HTC One Max, which looks like someone put Hulk serum on the HTC One. It's just ginormous. It's as big as my head, but it's scaled bigger. It's exactly the HTC One, just made enormous with the same proportions. But when Samsung went to the Galaxy S4, it looked like they just kind of increased the screen as much as they could. The body was the same, but the screen just got better. And as someone who doesn't want to carry around a 2x4, the idea of a larger screen without necessarily a larger device is very appealing.
I have seen Galaxy Notes being used, and I'm familiar with the HTC One Max and so on. I have very mixed feelings about phablets. I understand they're part in the ecosystem, and I understand why people like them. And I've even talked to people who own large devices, and I understand their individual reasons for wanting them. And the interesting thing is that there are different use cases. For some people, they just want one thing to do everything. They want a phone. They want something that can double as a tablet. They want something that they can do light computing work on as well. And for those people, a device like that works out surprisingly well. Some people have visual impairments, and they want a larger surface area to be able to see. So if the phone, in particular, if the phone can scale imagery and type to larger sizes to accommodate their limitations, that makes them feel a lot more comfortable too. And I think those are perfect reasons to have something that big. But, I don't want anything bigger than what would fit comfortably in my front jeans pocket when I walk around.
Yeah, it's interesting. Where is that phablet boundary? It used to be anything. I remember when the first Dell, was it the Streak, I think, came out, and it was 5 inches, and that was obviously not a phone. And now there's so many 5-inch phones on the market that phablets are now maybe 6 inches or bigger. And I'm not sure where the end of phone and beginning. And yeah, I don't mind the word phablet at all. I think it's funny and kind of cute, so I'll use it all the time. I don't know where the boundary between phone and phablet is anymore.
I'm not sure I do either. What I feel like is that we're sort of escalating the size of phablets as time goes on, and it reminds me a little bit of the 1980s when people started walking around with boom boxes, and eventually you would get that one guy with a boom box that was about 3 feet tall and looked like it weighed about 150 pounds. And he would be nonchalantly, or as nonchalantly as he could possibly muster, walking down the street with it hanging off the side of his shoulder, even though it looked like it was crushing him. But the bigger the speaker, the more impressive it is. It occurs to me that it's the same sort of technology. I don't know what to even call that. Just showing off your high tech in some gratuitous way.
No, that's absolutely a fair point. The other thing that you raised that I thought was interesting was the idea of scaled up versus more of. When the iPhone went to Retina, there was no more screen. There was more pixels, but there was no more screen. 1 pixel one point went from 1 pixel to 4 pixels. So even though there was a much higher quality screen, it was still the same size. When they went to the iPhone 5 and it went to a 4-inch screen, they didn't scale anything up. They actually added pixels so you could have more information on the screen. And I did a whole piece last January about the different ways they could go to 5 inches. But there's a lot of stuff they could do. They could scale up the interface, just go from 326 to 264 pixels per inch. It'd be the same it'd be the same density as the iPad 4, but everything would just be bigger. It would take it from a 4-inch to a 5-inch screen, but not change anything for developers, nothing for existing apps. It would just be slightly less dense. Mm-hmm. Or they could add more pixels. They could go to a 1080p display. So instead of 1136 by 960, no 640, sorry, it would be 1080 by 1920. In that case, you would have a bunch more pixels, so you could put even more information on the screen. Or they could do something again like Retina and go to pixel tripling or pixel quadrupling. There's so many different ways they could get there, and different people. People who are power users want more pixels. People who are more interested in accessibility just want everything to be bigger.
Yeah, that's right. So, whatever form factor they settle on for the iPhone 6 or for future iPhones just in general, I'm hoping that they'll figure out new and improved ways to actually use the device to make maximum use of that new space, whatever it might be.
It's interesting. I mean, I know I did this piece on, let me just find it here, 5 reasons why an iPhone 6 could be interesting to Apple. I'm just going to pull it up. But there's several things. A lot of people are citing technology that Apple has been working on. For example, auto layout, which lets the interface move around more and basically adjust to different size displays better. Things like dynamic text, text kit that lets the OS control the size of the font on the screen. And these technologies could make a bigger display easier because apps wouldn't be as dependent on screen sizes, sort of like the way, not at all like the way Android does it, but it would be similar to Android in that you wouldn't be so dependent on static screen sizes anymore. But I don't think that's part of some grand master plan. I think Apple didn't build those technologies to make a bigger screened iPhone. I think those were technologies that came to them that they thought were interesting enough to develop, and happenstantially that might allow them to make a bigger screened iPhone.
I'm still not sold that the market is demanding a bigger iPhone. Neil Douglas in our chat room says we need multiple sizes. People want choice. People are getting choice. There are choices in Android certainly about what size that they're getting, but what percentage of the actual customer base of people who are buying smartphones right now are doing that, and does it make it worth Apple's while to complicate the iPhone product line in that way?
So I've got my 5 reasons, Peter, and I'm interested in your take on them. So one is that Apple is dominant in the premium phone market. Any phone over $400, Apple's share I think has increased to 65% now, and it's going to come to a point where, similar to AT&T in the old days, back in 2010, you could only get an iPhone on AT&T in the US. So you had to choose between an iPhone and AT&T, and if AT&T was a deal breaker for you, some other phone on another network. And some people just had to choose another phone on another network. But then Apple went to Verizon, and suddenly you could have an iPhone on Verizon, and all those people increased Apple's customer base. And I feel like right now some people would love iOS, would love an iPhone, but they just feel like they need, or they really do need, a larger phone. So they're choosing a larger non-iPhone. And if Apple offered a larger size, those people could choose an iPhone that is bigger as well, and Apple would get those customers. And those are the only lucrative customers that companies like Samsung enjoy right now. So Apple could theoretically increase their share of the premium market and hurt a company like Samsung at the same time.
Yeah, I see the benefit of it. Okay, go on.
All right, next. It eliminates size alone as a differentiator. So in North America, the phone market is subsidized. So if you imagine walking into Best Buy and televisions were subsidized, and every television you saw cost $100 or $200 regardless of the size, and some of the bigger ones even cost less because their manufacturers were willing to take smaller cuts of the revenue stream. So you could go in there, and the 60-inch TV maybe cost $200, and the 120-inch TV cost $100. A lot of people would buy the TV simply the biggest one that could fit in their house, and it wouldn't matter anymore. And the only differentiator other premium phones have against the iPhone right now, besides people hating Apple, is that they are larger screens. So if Apple has multiple screens the way they do for the iPad, the way they do for the MacBook Air, the way they do for the MacBook Pro, I think it would eliminate size as that last differentiator for their competition.
Okay.
Next, it makes the iPhone, this is what you spoke about before, it makes the iPhone more functional as a primary computing platform. More and more people are going mobile, and they don't necessarily want to have to carry a MacBook with them or an iPad with them. And a larger screen will allow power users to do potentially more things, but it will also, in general, allow you to travel with that one device more easily.
So, sort of adopting the philosophy behind phablets in some areas where people just want one device to be able to do lots of things as their primary computing device.
Yeah, sort of like people for whom they absolutely have to have a phone, because when it comes down to it, a phone is a need to have and a tablet is still a nice to have. If you could only choose one, a lot of people will just have to simply have a phone. But it could be that the phone app is one of the least important apps on the device. They want to be able to play games, watch videos, even do productivity work, and the bigger screen helps them with that activity.
Okay.
Next is also what you mentioned before, accessibility, that there are people who have either visual or motor skill challenges, and the larger screen makes it easier to read, but also easier to navigate. The same way, for example, young children and older people find an iPad so much easier to use.
All right.
And the last one is, and this one is interesting to me, it allows software to become more sophisticated. So right now, one of Apple's arguments is that, Apple has two arguments against the bigger screen. One was traditionally that the technology sucked, that things like OLED still had problems with saturation, problems with the lifespan of blue blue pixels, and also that things like Pentile were necessary, like Samsung made Pentile displays, and that's really a horrible arrangement for human beings to look at digital screens. So there was a technological argument. You just couldn't make high-quality, good screens at the scale Apple needed to make it, hundreds of millions of units. And the second one was one-handed ease of use, that they wanted the iPhone to be able to be used in one hand while you were walking around, and that was an important thing to them. But hardware technology is getting better. The technology to make screens is getting better, but also software is getting more sophisticated. We saw this with WebOS a long time ago. We saw this with BlackBerry 10. We see this with iOS 7. Not only do you have auto layout and do you have the dynamic fonts, you also have all the gestures. So you, without having to move to a back button that was at the top left of the screen traditionally, you can now just swipe from the bezel, from the left bezel, and move backwards in the interface. You can swipe back and forth in Safari pages and a lot of other apps. And when the screen size gets bigger, like we saw with the original iPad, you can start writing. Steve Jobs said it. He said, like, we don't have baby software on our tablets. You can write powerful software. Eventually, a static screen size, 1136 by 640, just becomes a barrier to the advancement of the software. And if Apple could liberate themselves from that static size, whether they go bigger now or in the future, I think we could see more advanced software be the result of that.
That would be very nice to see indeed.
So that's my argument. I don't know if we're going to get it. I have heard that Apple is working on a larger screened iPhone, not two larger screened iPhones the way some people have reported. Maybe there's a second larger screen iPhone further away or still in prototype stage, but I have heard there's one at least being looked at for this year. And I would just like, I don't know if I would go for the bigger one, but I like the idea of there being a 4-inch and 5-inch iPhone the way there's a 7.9-inch iPad and 9.7-inch iPad, 11 and 13-inch MacBook Air, 13 and 15-inch Mac Pro, 21.5 and 27-inch iMac. I like the idea of Apple. I like the idea of there being a choice at every device level.
What worries me a little bit is how Apple would differentiate the 6-inch iPhone from the iPhone form factor that we're accustomed to now, or a larger iPhone versus the phone that we're accustomed to now. One really nice thing with the iPad and the iPad Mini is that there is literally no difference in performance. I mean, there's technically a difference in clock speed, but you're still dealing with the A7 processor. You're dealing with all the same capabilities that the iPad Air has, just in a smaller package. that you're paying $100 less for. So there's no compromise when you go to the store and decide whether or not you're going to get an iPad Air or an iPad Mini. You're just basing your decision on screen size. I think that would be a really good model for Apple to follow for the next generation iPhone, if there is indeed going to be an option for a larger form factor. I don't necessarily want to be pushed into a larger phone simply because it's got all the new features or because it's got the faster processor in it. I want to choose that phone because it's the right one for my use case, and I don't want to feel like I'm being penalized if I choose something else that's smaller.
Yeah, I agree with that absolutely. I was worried that we would not get as good an iPad Mini Retina as we got, but it got the A7 processor. It is a little lower clocked, for thermodynamic heat issues, but they're essentially the same tablet. You just pick the size that you want, and that would be fantastic for the iPhone. And I'd be curious to see what the product mix would end up being. Apple famously said at the last conference call, Tim Cook said that they thought the iPhone 5C would be more popular than it was. Or maybe they didn't anticipate the popularity of the iPhone 5S is a fair way to say that. And I wonder if we equate size with value in our purchasing decisions enough that it would skew things tremendously towards the larger sized phone if they were otherwise identical.
Well, that's something I don't think that we'll know until it actually happens. In the store that I work in, I watch people every weekend who come in without their minds made up about the iPad or the iPad Mini. Sort of, basing it purely on gut instinct. They use it for 5 minutes or whatever, and they figure out, what, I really like the smaller size, or what, I really like the bigger size. And it's interesting to watch them go through the permutations of it because I don't necessarily think that there is a correlation for people to walk in and assume, oh, the bigger one must be better somehow. They're really basing it on what their use case is and a whole bunch of factors, how they're going to be using it, where they're going to be taking it, and what they're going to be doing with it. So I think the same rules apply in many ways to an actual phone.
Nilesh, I'm going to mispronounce your last name, Prajpati. I apologize if that was incorrect. He's asking, do you think that Apple may make the iPhone thinner or keep the same thickness, size, and have more battery life? And this is something we've talked about before, and it's really interesting to me because Apple has, whenever possible, gone thinner every time they've iterated. The only exception is when they had to go slightly thicker and heavier for the first generation Retinas. And they have an opportunity here. I would have been fine with an iPhone 5 that was the same thickness as the 4S, but had massive, 2-day battery life and an amazing camera, because the things that hate thinness are battery life and camera. And if they go to a larger iPhone, Peter, they could, yes, make it thinner so that overall they can say the volume is again smaller, like the 5 was to the 4S. Or they could say, we decided that battery life, or our customers told us battery life is the most important thing to them. And we're keeping this iPhone the same thickness as the last one. It is not a millimeter thicker, but you will get you'll get like a day and a half or 2 days of battery life. And by the way, because it's thicker, we managed to not only put in the same camera as last year, but a much better camera with optical image stabilization, phenomenal low light, and whatever other magical features they managed to integrate.
Yeah, okay, now you're going off in science fiction land, but I was with you for most of the way there, Rene. You're absolutely right. Thinner design is one of Apple's mantras. You just take a look at just about everything that they've created, and just miniaturization and compactness. Whether you're talking about the iPad Air, which is not just thinner but significantly lighter than its predecessor, without sacrificing battery life, or the iMac. The iMac is another terrific case in point. Comparing like a 2011 iMac with the ones that came out last year and the year before, it's no comparison. They're completely different machines. So I can definitely see Apple trying to make it thinner, but Apple is not, I don't think, interested in sacrificing battery life for that, because battery life is one of the top issues that smartphone users complain about. It's one of the things that sophisticated smartphone users anyway will base their buying decisions.
I think Peter was about to say would base their buying decisions on before his Google Hangout crapped out, and I think that's absolutely true. I do think, however, eventually Apple is going to run out of thinness. In the future, we might have two-dimensional devices. We might have credit card thin devices, but that seems like a long, long way off, and it just feels like it will be physically impossible to keep making them significantly thinner year after year. At some point, it will have to stop or slow down, and I'm just interested to see whether they will go as far as is physically possible immediately, or if they will take the opportunity at some point to say, okay, this is thin enough, almost like they have with performance. It used to be that performance had to get significantly better year after year, but we got to the point where performance stopped increasing. Or stopped increasing significantly. It was just a little bit better, and we had to start making other things important, or at least if Apple wanted to sell computers, they had to make other things important. And what they've done recently with computers is battery life. The new MacBook Air is a little bit more powerful than previous generations, but it's significantly better battery life. It goes 12 hours for a 13-inch MacBook Air. And at this point, I would be willing to trade continued thinness for better battery life. Instead of it being thinner with the same battery life, I would love to see it be the same with significantly better battery life. If my phone could last 2 days, that feels like it would be worth so much more to me now than... Peter, you're back.
I would love to know why Google decided right then to insist on having me enter my credentials.
Yeah, they did that to me a couple weeks. So just to quickly sum up what I was just talking about, I was just wondering, you can't get thin forever. Eventually you'll end up as a credit card, and the laws of physics do not allow for phones to be credit cards yet. And I'm wondering if it might be like PCs, where for a long time it was performance, but now we've hit the performance wall. Chips just aren't getting faster at the same rate, so they've gone towards battery life, and now the new MacBook Airs, instead of being tremendously faster, have tremendously better battery life. And I wonder if Apple's going to be forced to, if Apple will hit the thinness wall in mobile and turn towards battery life the same way.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I am reluctant to think that that there's going to be a major change there, but we'll see what happens.
So my last sort of tangent here is, and some people have brought this up, do you think the pressure or the demand for a larger iPhone would lessen if Apple put phone.app on the iPads? Some of Samsung has had phone apps on their tablets. I think some other manufacturers have. People have asked for the ability to do telephony on their iPads. Would that just, if you want a bigger screen, you just get an iPad and you can still make phone calls with a headset if you want?
I'm sorry, say that again. I just got some static in my ear.
Sorry, if Apple put phone.app on the iPads, would that take some of the pressure off? Because you could just get a tablet, still make your phone calls when and if you have to with a headset, and wouldn't necessarily need a bigger phone.
That's a really interesting question, because it's something that comes up every so often for people who are shopping specifically for iPad minis. They want to know if they can make a call on it. And the straight answer is no, you can't. But in point of fact, you can if you want to use something like Skype or another VoIP tool. And certainly some people who have iPads even use FaceTime for that if their entire families are dialed into the Apple ecosystem. My question is, though, how much would that actually cannibalize iPhone sales if people were going out and getting iPad minis? And also, how would this affect Apple's decision one way or the other if they were going to build a larger phone? Would you blur that line too much? I think that there's got to be some sort of delineation between buying a phone from Apple and buying a tablet, and I'm not sure that Apple's ready to cross that line by building cellular radio into the iPad that can do phone calls too.
Yeah, it's really interesting because you have a full cellular radio on the iPhones that do voice and data. You have only data cellular radios on the iPads, and we still have, it's 2014, Peter, and there's still no built-in cellular option on Macs.
Go figure. Yeah, it makes me a little sad, but I do have personal hotspot on my iPhone 5S, so every so often when I'm out and I can't get a Wi-Fi signal because whatever place I'm at doesn't have Wi-Fi, I'll turn personal hotspot on and just use it from there.
Mike Costa says, do you think they need to go thinner to accommodate for larger screen size and to keep the phone light and manageable with one hand? That is absolutely, I think that's absolutely the case. I think Apple would have a hard time selling a larger phone that's also a brick.
Yeah, absolutely. Larger and fatter is a bad way to go. But you know, what is it? Fat and drunk is no way to go through life, son.
All right, so I want to transition us from iPhone rumors to Apple TV rumors because those have been interesting too. There's every indication that a new Apple TV is coming. The last one was updated, what was it, 2012, March or April when the iPad 3 was introduced. Apple's got a phenomenal team of software engineers doing some pretty awesome stuff with it. That the question is what and when, and one of the latest rumors is sort of that there might. Let me back up again. I'm backing up a lot today, but my mind is still on Central Time, so I think that's fair.
It's snowblind from Winnipeg. Yeah, snowdrifts.
Steve Jobs, when he was at All Things D, outlined the reasons why the telephone market was incredibly difficult to enter, and most of it surrounded the fiefdoms of cable TV. He said that if you think cell phone carriers are nuts, at least you're dealing country by country and not, city by city in some cases with cable operators who want to control the zero input position. They have cable boxes and they own all the content. It's a very difficult situation, and none of that have changed. And we'll get to some of the reasons why in a minute. But one of the latest rumors is that you'll be able to just screw your cable input right into the Apple TV, and it will auto-magically handle that. I do think there's a new Apple TV coming. It could come as early as this spring. I just don't know if things. I don't know what Apple could do to really make that a highly differentiated product, except for launching some version of an app store to go with it. I think that DVR, pie in the sky dreams will never happen. And I think even if they do get cable pass through, like we saw with the Xbox One, that's fine for the U.S., but doesn't really help anybody outside the U.S.
Yeah, no, that's true. Look, it's a competitive market, and Apple right now is the 800-pound gorilla in that market. So you can argue that Apple really doesn't have to do much with the Apple TV to continue to maintain its lead. Roku, despite a lot of the benefits of Roku, like having thousands or hundreds of channels to be able to download and use on your device, only takes up a minority part of it. And I think that as it's been said by analysts in the past, the killer app that Apple has with the Apple TV is connectivity with other Apple devices. If you've got a Macintosh, or if you've got an iPad, or if you've got an iPhone, that's when the Apple TV really starts to shine. Really starts to offer you an enhanced experience with your television that you wouldn't be able to get otherwise. Now, in terms of what an Apple TV could do to really differentiate itself, like a new Apple TV, if Apple were to open an app store and make it open to third-party developers, I think that could be very cool. As a gamer, I'm very, very interested in the gaming potential of the Apple TV because, of course, I have played games on the Apple TV using my other iOS devices and AirPlay. AirPlay streaming works very well over that, but it's not suitable for all games because Wi-Fi streaming via AirPlay introduces a certain amount of lag. It's great for casual games. It's fine for turn-based games. Where you get into trouble is if you've got arcade action games that are very, very twitchy, that are down to the millisecond response time. That's where you run into problems with that sort of lag. Having said that, I've recently been playing with the SteelSeries Stratus game controller. This is the wireless Bluetooth game controller and MFI game controller that isn't designed to clamp on to the iPhone 5 or 5C like the products from Logitech and Moga. This is a standalone device that looks like a little tiny Xbox controller that's about that big, and it's got dual thumbsticks and D-pads and shoulder buttons and action buttons and the whole 9 yards, and it works just like a big controller does, but it's small enough to stick in your breast pocket when you're not using it. The thing about that is you only have kind of a limited experience using it on the iPad or using it on the iPhone because you've got a small screen in front of you. When you AirPlay, your device to the Apple TV, it's a completely different experience. And I would love to just be able to run games straight from the Apple TV, so I don't run in to those lag issues that I do with AirPlay, because it's a long road to hoe for a general consumer to figure this out, right? Oh, okay, I have to connect my SteelSeries game controller to my iPhone, and then via Bluetooth, and then I have to turn on AirPlay streaming and have my Apple TV on. That's just too many steps, I think, for muggles, as I like to call them, to be able to do some of this stuff. I think it would be much more approachable if you were able to run those apps from the Apple TV itself. So that's my pitch for why I think Apple TV gaming could really be a big thing. The question is it still going to be a streaming box, or is it actually going to have enough internal memory that you can download and keep these things for a certain period of time, and the data that's associated with them, and how much would it be? Because you get a big game that's half a gig, maybe that's all the capacity that the Apple TV has, or all the capacity it might have for downloadable content. It introduces some issues.
What's that Steam box? The Steam box is basically a PC at this point, right?
Steam boxes are PCs. In fact, they are running Linux. They're running a Linux kernel.
But they have Steam games are not small. You have much more capacity. I think the Apple TV, the current one, has 8 gigabytes of NAND flash, and that's not going to get you very far.
That's not going to get you very far. It's certainly easy to max out a 16 gigabyte iPhone with big games in a very short period of time. If you start downloading stuff that's got a lot of logic in it and a lot of big textures, like, let's say, Infinity Blade 3, I think that's well over a gigabyte, or pretty damn close to it, if not over it.
And that's not including when you stream stuff from the Apple TV, it does buffer it locally, so you're taking up a lot of that space with the Netflix or the iTunes or the whatever you're watching.
Yeah, assuming your ISP isn't throttling Netflix bandwidth on you.
So this is the interesting thing. I wonder if Apple would have to do a full-on app store the way we're used to it on an iPhone or an iPad. And for example, Hockenberry would have Twitterific for Apple TV ready to go day one, the way they have for every other Apple platform, or whether they could do simply a game store, like not even an app store, but a game store, or whether there would have to be at least a game and an entertainment store, or whether they could keep game store for developers and entertainment just for the kind of partnership deals they're doing now with Crunchyroll and Netflix and things like that. I personally think a game-only store could be successful on Apple TV.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up their current content production or content sharing deals with companies like Crunchyroll, because the way that it works now with an Apple TV channel is that the framework for making those channels is very simple, and it's very rudimentary for the for the developers to use. And there's a certain amount of leeway to incorporate things like identity checking to make sure that the customer who is watching your stuff is actually vetted to do so through the
cable
company.
I could not AirPlay I had Netflix on my iPad. I could not AirPlay it to Kevin's Apple TV because we were logged in on different Netflix accounts.
Yeah, exactly. And I can't tell you how many customers come in and just get really frustrated. They're ready to buy an Apple TV, thinking that they're going to cut the cable TV cord. And it's like, no, wait a minute. If you want to watch HBO Go, or if you want to watch ABC, I think ABC too, if you want to watch a certain other content providers on here, you need to have an active account with. If you're not going to go with Comcast, then with AT&T Uverse or Dish Network or whatever, you've got to have some kind of connectivity.
And you can't just buy that channel independently. You can't just say HBO or ABC, I'm going to give you money for my watching.
Right, which is what I think a lot of people would like to do, just a la carte stuff. It's tough. Apple does not have the same sort of freedom of motion that they've got with the Apple TV that they had with the iPod when the iTunes Store, when that sort of became the heir ascendant to the way that people were going to listen to music digitally. The music industry was in tough shape. They were losing a lot of money to piracy. It's a very different story. For big media companies like Sony, Universal, all these other companies, they're not in the same boat that the record companies were in, even though some of them had record subsidiaries at the time, and they are not willing to give Apple the same sort of leeway that the record companies got back in the day.
And they also had a very different business. I mean, you posted about the news that Comcast is making a bid to buy Time Warner Cable. That
Yeah.
was something you never had to deal with just music.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, sure, there was consolidation in the music industry too, but combining Comcast and Time Warner will produce a cable service provider that reaches out to about 30 million people in the U.S. That's a lot of customers.
And owns part of a network, right? I think they own part of NBC.
Yeah, NBC Universal, right? Exactly. So it's part of a hegemony, and Time Warner, Time Warner.
It's yeah, I don't. Apple is really good at solving problems, but they have to have the ability to solve them. And I think that Apple's going to have to pick their fights or pick their areas of focus very carefully to make this a product that is both enjoyable to us, but also enjoyable enough to make it something more than it is already.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree with that. And I mean, Apple TV is selling at a fair clip. Apple sold 7.5 million of them in 2012, I think. Isn't that right?
Yeah, it was much better than I think it was twice as many in the first half of the year it was as many in the first half of the year as they sold the entire previous year.
So a lot of people are buying Apple TVs. We've joked in the store that if we just sold Apple TVs and iPhone cables, Lightning cables, we could probably double or triple our profit.
All right, so just to stick with the gaming thing for a minute, we saw the Flappy Bird has to be one of the weirdest things that I've ever seen on the App Store. And Peter, it's over. You don't have to worry about it anymore. But I do.
Now I got to worry about splashy fish and iron pants and all the Flappy Bird.
Yeah,
clones.
That's disappointing. But the thing is this: it's such an interesting story because on the face of it, you have this game designer who had a fondness for Nintendo style or 8-bit style gaming, who made a very simple game that struck a chord with gamers. It had an interesting mechanic, incredibly difficult. It made you want to complain about it to people who would then try it. Spread like wildfire.
As you put it, rage of mouth.
Rage of mouth, absolutely. But he ostensibly got upset about the addictive quality of this game, that people were liking the game to an unhealthy degree, would play it too much, it would cause too many problems, and brought ultimately too much attention on him personally. And so he removed it from the store. A lot of people thought the game was just crap. No game who's that successful can be utter crap. It can be infuriating. You could even say it's like the National Enquirer or TMZ of gaming, but those things have huge appeal to a lot of people, and I never want to sort of say that I never want to call a large consumer base dumb. Pet Rock, whatever, people found something in this game to like, and ultimately it ended very sadly. And I don't know if there's a larger lesson to be extrapolated from about the App Store or the future of gaming on mobile from this whole sort of cautionary tale.
What I thought was really interesting about the way that it all played out is that Dong Nguyen is the guy behind Flappy Bird, and a lot of people have questioned his motivation for pulling it. A lot of people were questioning the authenticity of its viral popularity. A lot of people were suspecting that he had gamed the App Store with positive reviews, although closer analysis really doesn't bear that out. It does look like it was a really sort of organic thing. And then a lot of people were saying, wait a minute, this guy's making $50,000 a day in advertising, and he's pulling the plug on it. What the heck is going on here? He must have an ulterior motive for pulling it. I am not going to guess on his motivation one way or the other, although I will say in the interview or two that he's given since this whole imbroglio got going, he comes across to me as pretty off the cuff and pretty legit in what he's been saying. And I think that he was really kind of taken aback by the attention that he was getting from this. And who can blame him? I mean, getting the gimlet eye of the internet on you is very terrifying for a lot of people. And unless you're ready for the scrutiny and unless you are up for the publicity, that can be enough to chase you away. And as a creator of this app, he certainly had the right to pull the plug on it if he thought it was getting out of hand.
Yeah, I mean, people are naive and cunning. People are fragile and resilient, and it can often be a razor's thin edge what separates you at any given moment.
But back to the point, back to the sort of the meat of Flappy Bird, if you will, the flappy meat of Flappy Bird. I have to say, I had it on my phone for probably about 3 or 4 minutes, and I deleted it almost immediately. I was so pissed off with it, and I wasn't upset because I was no good at the game. I was no good at the game, but that wasn't why I was upset with it. I was upset with it because it was needlessly difficult. It was completely, unrepentantly, not just challenging, it was excruciatingly hard to get anything more than a single-digit score. And I just said, you know what? I'm not interested in beating myself up over this, even for a free game. I don't want the stress in my life that this application incurs for me. And I am a little sick and tired of developers treating their gamers like douchebags, either by sucking every last dime out of them, out of in-app purchases, like EA does with Dungeon Keeper, for example, or King does with Candy Crush Saga, or just being mean to their just being unrelentingly mean to their players by having these ridiculously hard games. Focus on the gameplay. Make it fun. Make it enjoyable. Take me for a little ride. But don't treat me like a jerk. I don't want to be treated like a jerk when I play a game. It irritates me. Speaking of in-app purchases, by the way, remind me, Rene, I've got something else to add to that.
All right, so before you add that, let me just put this part in it. So it seems to me that this, if nothing else, reaffirmed that the App Store has gone from being a gold rush to being a lottery. And you can absolutely strike that one game that makes you rich, but just like in real life, people who win lotteries often end up miserable and destitute. And if you don't have a system set up for longevity, and it's the same with the stock market, people who play the stock market short are seldom happy. People who go for one-shot hits, people get one-hit wonders, are seldom happy. I think it behooves everybody to do exactly what you said, to build their business, their app, their game, their focus on life around sustainable happiness. And I think that would fix a lot of the problems.
Exactly. And you see a lot of pontification online from social media experts and developers and others who try to divine the formula for getting a smash hit like a Candy Crush or Clash of Clans. Or a Flappy Bird, or what have you on the App Store, and it reminds me a little bit of alchemists trying to turn lead into gold. Yeah. I think that I'm sure that there is mathematical formulation that you can do for it, but I just don't think that our understanding of quantum mechanics is quite there yet to make it happen. I was
just going to say the quantum thing. The more you try for it, the more you affect it.
Right, exactly. I think we've got to leave this to the big brains and just, get on with our lives. But seriously, there's nothing wrong with taking the slow and steady approach to this and trying to develop an organic relationship with your clients, with your customers, and treat them respectfully. And either they're going to reward you or they're not. But pass or fail, it beats the karmic consequences of doing it a jerky way, and all the bad will that sort of invokes.
No, I agree completely. You wanted to say something about in-app purchases?
I do indeed want to say something about in-app purchases. So I was just ranting a few moments ago about Dungeon Keeper from EA, which is a really egregious example of how in-app purchases negatively impact the play experience of a game. And you can read more about that on our site. Simon Sage wrote an interesting thought piece last week that actually defends Dungeon Keeper a little bit, and I thought that he raised some very good points. However, there is a game that came out this week that I want to draw everyone's attention to who's listening or watching this podcast, and that game is Any Landing from a company called Strange Flavor. That's Flavor O-U-R, spelled in the Queen's English, not in American English. And you can find it on the App Store. And it is fun. It's an endless runner sort of game in which you pilot an aircraft that is in very shoddy mechanical condition, and basically your goal is to crash land your plane as safely as possible while grabbing whatever you can out of the sky in the form of money and tokens and other stuff before you crash land, and then try to crash land safely so your passengers and your cargo will get out alive. Any landing takes its name from the old expression that any landing that you walk away from is a good one. These guys have come up with a really nice in-app purchase system, and it's a new thing that they're introducing with this game, and they call it Play Nice. And I think it's a really great idea. The idea is you can certainly spend money in this game in in-app purchases in the form of wings to get yourself ahead in the game. But you will never spend more than $10 in total. Once you spend $10, the game is unlocked. That's it. It's the same as if you had bought the all-you-can-eat pack that they offer as part of the in-app purchases in the first place. So Strange Flavor has said, you know what? If you give us $10 in total, that's it. You're going to have the whole game. You know, nothing extra you're going to need in order to compete with everyone else. At that point, it's just up to your skill level and how good you can get it. And what's more is that if you're not ready to buy the all-you-can-eat version, if you buy wings packs individually, that goes towards your total. So eventually, if you keep spending 99 cents, you're going to get there after 10 transactions. Really wonderful way to do it. I want to see more game companies do this because this is something that I've been ranting about for a long time. I think that in-app purchase games need some, and just in-app purchase apps in general need some sort of lifetime cap where, you know, unless you're paying for a subscription to a magazine or a music service or something else like that, where you say, all right, you know what, once I've spent a maximum amount of money, that's it. You don't get any more money from me. I like that. I like that a lot, and I wish them their best success with it.
I like it too. I love the idea of an in-app cap. I do think it's going to always be rare. It's almost like, you know, no one who's a good parent goes to parenting classes. It's one of those things where a lot of the companies who do in-app purchases do not have our best interests in mind. They're built on the casino model, and they just want to fleece us. And they're not going to adapt these models, which I think makes it important for us to support the companies who are ethical, who do want to just make a great game and sustain their business. And in-app purchases is the only way to do it, but they don't want to take advantage of it. And drawing the line at $10, which is what, you know, Super Monkey Ball cost when the App Store launched. That was the price of games when the iPhone launched, and we decided not to pay it. So I think, you know, there will be a couple cases, like if you keep making level packs every few months or every year, I'll keep buying them, you know, as long as you keep making them. But if it's just for in-game stuff, it's the stuff that's already there. I think this is a brilliant idea. And I think I've been playing Threes. Threes kept me alive in Winnipeg. And it's a wonderful game. You buy it up front. There is no in-app purchase. There is no ads. You give them $2 and your relationship is over.
Well, except for the part where you lose your soul to the game.
Yes, that is true. But it's a really simple, really well-realized game, and I think I'd love to see more of that as well.
Yeah, Threes, by the way, is developed by the same guys behind one of my favorites from last year, Puzzle Juice, which was a combination of Scrabble and Tetris. Very interesting game where, you know, you've got the falling shapes in Tetris, but in order to make the lines go away, you actually had to form words. Brilliant puzzle creators, these guys are, and Threes is just irritatingly good.
Yeah, I cannot recommend it enough. Q&A time. So we're trying to do questions and answers every show. If you want to send in a question at any time, you can email it to podcast@imore.com, podcast singular, PODCAST @imore.com, and we'll get it and save it for the show. You can also use hashtag AskImore, ASKIMORE, on Twitter, or you can leave a comment on the previous show, a comment on the post. You can come live to the show. That's probably the best way because we love, you know, when people join us live on the show, and we're live every Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. Questions for this week, we have a couple from Emil. Mobile World Congress, are you guys going, and if so, what are you looking forward to? New Apple products, accessories. If people are not familiar with Mobile World Congress, it is the biggest mobile show on Earth. It happens every spring in Barcelona, Spain. Apple has never gone. Apple has never announced any products there. Apple has had their own events, sometimes at roughly the same time, like iPad events in previous years. But Peter, iMore does not go. Our friends from Mobile Nations go. Android Central goes. Windows Phone Central goes. Kevin Michaluk from Crackberry is going. We don't ever go because Apple doesn't go.
Right.
Apple does not play other people's shows anymore. They only do their own.
Yeah, well, why do they have to if they get all the publicity themselves?
Now, if there are any really cool cases or apps announced or services or whatever, we do have Richard Devine will be there, Phil Nickinson, Kevin Michaluk, like I said, and they will absolutely bring back anything that's really important. There's just no reason for Peter and I to hop a plane to Europe. Sorry, Peter, no paella for you.
Oh no, that's fine. That's fine. Don't apologize.
Nilesh asks, why does Apple Store for iPad or iTunes movie trailer app, why are they still US only and not worldwide? Yeah, Peter, why are you hogging this stuff for yourself?
I'm sorry, it's all my fault.
I don't know the typical answer for why an app is US only is usually licensing restrictions or partnership restrictions. That means that the company involved wants to have partners doing things like maybe they're providing location information or movie information or what have you, or they need to license the content and they simply don't have time yet or can't get the licenses in other countries. The Apple Store app, I don't know. I would have thought, it did take the iPhone version a long time to go from being US only to going to the UK and Canada and other countries. It doesn't surprise me. It could, Peter, you work at retail. It could just be the differences in the retail systems or how the systems are integrated.
I suspect it's a regulatory thing, but I have no proof to support my assertion.
And the trailers app, I don't know because I can get them on apple.com by the web. Apple, just please make them universal. That's all I can ask of you. Shepard wants to know, we already answered that, Apple TV more interactive in May-June release. Christina wants to know how to use an AeroPress. Well, that is an awesome question. I do not think that is a question that I can address on an iPhone. I could break my AeroPress out, but I don't think that would really service the interests of most of our listeners.
The AeroPress. Yes, I could opine on how best to make an AeroPress. The question is, Rene, do you do it like the regular way, or do you use the inversion method?
I use the regular version, but I am still new to the AeroPress. I've only had it for a short period of time. This is how I do it. I take Tonks beans, which are really fresh. I grind them up. I put 2 spoonfuls in the top of the AeroPress once the filter and cap are on. I put it over a mug. I pour the water up to the 2 mark. Then I put the plunger in, and I stir it for 10 seconds, put the plunger in, press down for 20 seconds. So I do it exactly as it is said on the booklet to do it.
So the inversion method, what you do is you set the plunger in the end of it or wherever you want in the column for however much coffee you want. And I usually go for 4 because I've got these really big mugs that I like to drink out of. And then you put your coffee in the top where the filter goes. And you fill it up slowly. You let the coffee bloom a little bit, and then you stir it. And then you fill it up to whatever level you want. And the neat thing about doing it this way is that the water doesn't leak out the bottom because you've got the plunger in there. So you can actually steep it for longer. Steep it for 2 or 3 minutes if you want and get a really strong cup of coffee. Once you do it that way, once you're done steeping it, then you screw the filter attachment on, flip it over, and then plunge to your heart's content. So there you go. 2 methods for working with your AeroPress.
That is excellent. I'm going to actually try that, Peter. I'm a little bit scared of dropping it and spilling coffee all over the place, but I will give it a try anyway. I will.
Well, the advantage that you've got is that you knock it up to what, the 2 or 3 mark?
Yeah.
So you can get the plunger in there a little way. I always go for 4, so I'm always sort of, it makes the experience a little dangerous for me every morning.
Ziggerdog wants to know why when you delete a message, I'm assuming it's Gmail in Mailbox, I don't know if he means the mail app or the actual Mailbox app, does it come back?
Because Google hates you.
That's the real reason. Gmail is a fantastic, wondrous service, and like all fantastic, wondrous services, it will take any opportunity you give it to drive you absolutely insane for no repeatable or possible reason. So I've heard of this many, many times. I believe it's a known issue. It might have to do with the way Google runs it, but it happens every now and then. It especially used to happen on OS 10 Mavericks if you had removed the archive folder, I believe, from your folder mapping. But I think that part at least has been fixed.
Good news.
Nilesh also wants to know about the iAnywhere thing, and I'm hesitant to talk about this for several reasons. It's something written by an analyst that's incredibly odd. It's like Apple should make the iPhone and the Mac work better together. Yes, of course, but these are non-trivial things. I mean, like some people have said, well, why doesn't Apple just put a Thunderbolt port on the iPhone, and then it could just connect to your Mac and use it like a screen? The iPhone is not PCI architecture based. It's an entirely different architecture. It is not compatible with Thunderbolt. That's, maybe they could make an adapter that would do something fancy and make it work, but you'd still be using a touch optimized device on a big screen, which is no different than AirPlay. It's only tethered, so why not just AirPlay? So should there be AirPlay to Macs as well as to television? I mean, it's one of those things that is so easy to just say, and I can. It is impossible that Apple has not thought about the future interplay of their devices to a far greater and likely intelligent extent than this. But I think saying it is the easy part.
So my take on this is, with apologies to John Moltz, Mac pundit and humorist. He actually linked to Lance Whitney's coverage of this over on CNET. Mark Moskowitz said, while not a new idea, our global tech research team believes Apple could be on the cusp of introducing a new category with iAnywhere, a converged macOS iOS operating system that allows an iPhone or iPad to dock into a specially configured display to run as a computer. So if you didn't know what iAnywhere was, that's the idea. Moskowitz is pitching this idea that you could use an iPhone or an iPad in a dock, and you would have a Mac-like user experience.
Which Apple had a patent for a couple of years ago.
Right. Moltz's comment on it was, yes, if there's anything we've learned from the past 2 years, it's that Apple desperately needs to chase the Surface.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. That's the thing that kills me the most about this, because I think the analyst said that he wanted this in the next couple of years, and the result of that would be Windows 8, which I don't think any of us want.
No, yeah. This is an analyst. I don't understand why. I'm pretty sure Wall Street analysts go off into the desert and trip on peyote for 3 days, and then they come back, and it's Gene Munster saying, Apple's going to build a television. Or Mark Moskowitz going, yeah, Apple's going to build an iAnywhere platform. No. Come back to earth, guys.
I've addressed the way this works is that Apple is a secretive company, but there are things that leak out often hardware, and the problem is not always, and this explains DigiTimes a lot too, the problem is not always the information, it's the analysis attached to it. For example, the TV rumors, and I've said this before, originally started because Apple ordered 27-inch panels, and Munster and other analysts said, oh, they must be building a television set. Turns out they were building a 27-inch iMac. That's the product that came out, because Apple uses panels for things other than televisions. And I'm sure if Apple is readying a 4K display, a lot of people are saying, oh, they're building a television again. They're building what they always built, Thunderbolt displays. This is not rocket science. And I'm sure Apple is investigating. Apple would be negligent to not investigate all sorts of wonderful things for the future. But let me put it this way, too. These are not new ideas. I remember Torsten Heinz of BlackBerry getting trounced in the media for saying that he believes that a BlackBerry smartphone could be the brain of the future, that you'd walk into a room, you'd put it down, it would store all of your preferences in an iCloud-like thing, and then it would just use whatever capabilities the device around you had. So basically you'd have one brain that you carried around, and everything else would be a thin client, which is not dissimilar from Google's perspective. The Chrome OS is a thin client. They're just storing things in the server and not an endpoint like a phone. And we're going to see a lot of experimentation again. But again, I think this is another case of an analyst not understanding the technology involved in the obvious ideas that they're stating.
Not only that, but not understanding how the technology is used. It just seems completely detached from reality.
Yeah. Fast forward to 20 years, and a lot of the things that people say would never happen or will absolutely happen will look incredibly silly in hindsight. And it's worthwhile doing repercussion modeling. It's worthwhile taking yourself 5 years ahead and saying, if I look back at that, is it really that hard to imagine, or is it absolutely preposterous? And doing that as a mental exercise before you propagate the idea. And I think that helps on a micro and a macro level, and absolutely keeps Peter much more sane during the day.
Absolutely, a little less rageful.
All right, so Peter, if people do want to follow you and see the full extent of your fury, where can they go?
Probably the best place to do it if you want to drink straight from the fire hose is Twitter, where I am Flarg, Flargh, and you can also find my writings on iMore, iMore.com.
You can find me at the same place. You can find me on all the social things at Rene Ritchie. If you joined us live, I want to thank you. You are a beautiful, intelligent bunch of people. We really appreciate you being here for us. If you haven't yet joined us live, you are missing out on Shakespeare the way it is meant to be heard. And you can find us, like I said, 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time every Thursday. Just go to imore.com. You'll find us on the front page. If you cannot join us live, then you can find us on iTunes, on RSS. Just take a look for iMore. Please subscribe. Please leave a rating. Please leave a review. It lets us know what you think of the show and what you'd like us to do more of or less of. I do want to just tell people we are having problems with the video feed. If you watch the video on YouTube, it's the same as always, but the video RSS and iTunes feed, our old provider just became unworkable. We were getting nothing but complaints. It was taking forever to download shows, and we're in the midst of switching to a new provider. It's taking longer than we expected because these are expensive hosts, and it takes a while to find a good fit and migrate everything over. But we're hoping to complete that as absolutely soon as possible. So if you are a subscriber to the video channel, I apologize. You'll need to use YouTube for now, but we'll hope to have that fixed really soon. That was our bad. Peter, one more week down.
Woohoo!
One more show down. We're only 11 away from big number 400.
Wow.
Yep.
400, man.
Yep.
And that's there got to be a few gaps in there too, like the weeks that were not done because of other commitments.
Yeah, I mean, well, we also double it for a while. We had both iPhone and iPad shows, and we combined those together.
Ah, okay.
So we double dipped for a while as well. So we'll see what it all evens out.
So do you remember what the anniversary of the first show was?
I don't. I'll have to go look. That was Dieter Bohn and Mike Overbo who did it. So I have to go way back and find the first episode of the Phone Different podcast.
Way back in the day when they were recording the whole thing on videotape and sending it out to people on Betamax?
I think it was on Reel to Reel.
Reel to Reel. Excellent. Excellent. So it was sort of like the old Twilight Zone episodes?
Yep. No, absolutely. So we'll try to plan something special for that, and we'll keep you apprised. How's that?
Good. Very good.
Peter, have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you so much for joining me.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks again, chat room.